Okay, so this is a translation and a discussion of one of the project passages for the 2025-2026 school year, which is the passage from Augustine's Confessions, in which he talks about the experiences that he had as a child learning a different language. So something that obviously is going to be near and dear to your heart as a student trying to obviously make your way through the Latin language. So he says, "Cur ergo, why therefore, had I hated." Remember that oderam is a defective verb whose principal parts are odi, odisse, and remember as well that since it is defective and thus is only going to be in the perfect system, it will have not a normal present first principal part with an o, but rather one would expect a perfect stem and a perfect ending. And so therefore, same exact thing in the second principal part, in which instead of a what's normally second principal part present active infinitive, it has a perfect active infinitive. And so here is indeed that pluperfect ending that we stick on the end of odi, odisse. So, why therefore had I hated the Greek system of learning? Here it's going to be like Greek literature. And just stick in that also or even. Why therefore even did I hate the Greek literature? That literature singing such things as your accusative, substantized, direct object, plural neuter. For Homer, and here's our subject, that of course referring to the great poet, singer of the Iliad and the Odyssey, he both and. He is both skilled to write such stories, such fables if you would like, and he is deceptive most sweetly. It's a superlative adverb, obviously. However, and so this is showing the contrast, to me, a boy, he was bitter. He was amarus. Credo etiam. I believe. Now normally what you would have with a verb of mental action like credo is that you would expect then to have the indirect statement with an accusative subject and an infinitive verb. But in later Latin what happens is that instead of using an infinitive with an accusative subject, they revert to having a regular old nominative and thus having a subjunctive, which sit of course is the subjunctive present from sum esse, sim, sis, sit, sim, sit, sint. So indeed I believe also Virgil is in such a way, i.e. bitter, to Greek boys. And so therefore with the shoe on the other foot, Augustine is conjecturing that when those Greek boys are forced to read Virgil in the way that he was forced to try and read Homer, that it was an incredibly frustrating, bitter experience. A universal one that is universally linked by Augustine to just learning any language. And it's the circumstances, as we're about to see, that makes the learning bitter in its process. Nevertheless, so that Virgil is in such a way to Greek boys, cum, and remember with cum, first thing you do, look for an ablative. Obviously there is no ablative with it, so it does not mean with, it means when, since, or although. The reason why two whens is it could be the specific time with an indicative when, or the non-specific general circumstances when. So let's go see what kind of verb we have, and here it is. It is indicative, so we know that it's going to be that specific when. When, at a specific time, they are compelled to learn him, referring to Virgil, in such a way as, because there is no subjunctive. Remember, whenever you see the word ut, look for a subjunctive, no subjunctive. A rule of thumb translation could be as I was compelled, implied, to learn that guy, Homer, as it were. Now, he then goes on to start to explain why this. Alright, so we continue. Sorry about the interruption there, but nevertheless. And so, we start with vidi licet. And certainly, or obviously, or anything like that. Here they suggest in the notes clearly, and so we'll go with that. So clearly, the difficulty in the nominative. I tell my students as a rule of thumb that if you can replace an as with the letter y and it give you an English word, it lets you know that that long as is not accusative plural, but rather nominative, and thus what we have here. So clearly, the difficulty, and he repeats it, the difficulty of, and this we have our genitive, of a foreign language about to be learned. It is a gerundive. Remember that if it is a gerund, it could only have the endings of genitive singular of the second declension neuter, or dative singular, or accusative, or ablative. If it doesn't have one of those endings, it's guaranteed to be a gerundive, and it's doing what gerundivs do, which, of course, as gerundives are participles, they are adjectives, it's modifying. And so, therefore, clearly the difficulty of a foreign language about to be learned completely or at all, it was sprinkling all the Greek sweetness of those fabulous stories as if with bitterness. And so therefore, he's saying that he understands that the literature, that the art is beautiful, but when you are struggling with that art, you don't have an opportunity or an ability to understand or appreciate that beauty. I tell my students that when I put the Aeneid in front of them, I am placing some of the world's greatest art in front of them. They don't feel like that because it is the overwhelming difficulty of sifting through all the new vocabulary, all the nuance, all the grammar, that they indeed don't appreciate and have the ability to see that beauty. And that is exactly the kind of sentiment that is being given here. We continue. 4, and this is why he doesn't appreciate the art and the beauty that he indeed refers to them as fabulous stories. For I had known, nosco, noscere, no we. We have the perfect stem to the left, and then we have, of course, the pluperfect ending, eram, erat. For I had known none those verbs, none those words. And so therefore he has in front of him what is beautiful, but he doesn't appreciate the beauty because he doesn't even understand any of those words. And it was demanded. Here we're obviously going to have an impersonal. And always when I have an impersonal, I make the it, that right there. And it is not really our subject. Whenever you have an impersonal, your subject is really going to be a verb. That verb is going to be expressed most often either as an infinitive or as a subjunctive ut clause. And that's exactly what we have here with that ut nosem, which of course is syncopated from novisissem, a pluperfect subjunctive. And so, and it was demanded for me vehemently with both savage terrors and punishments that I learn it, that I had known it. And so I ain't know it, but it was demanded for me that I know it. And so obviously what makes the experience terrible is the fact that he has, under the threat of punishment, the compulsion, forcing to learn these things that he does not know. Now, he's then going to go on to a different experience of learning language, which is what he has already done. Nobody pops out the womb knowing a language. And so he then goes on to say, for as an infant, and here our subject, again, same exact form, I, but I as an infant. And so, utique, certainly, I as an infant had known, and here, aliquando, at one time, at some time, in the past implied, no Latin implied words. Because as I say, nobody pops out the womb knowing words. You have to learn it. And he's already done that with Latin. So, for also, I, as an infant, certainly at one time, had known no Latin words. However, also, I did learn disco, discere, didici by the act of paying attention. Here we do have a gerund. It's not modifying anything, and it does have one of those forms. It's the ablative form, by the act of paying attention. But I did learn, however, by paying attention without any fear and torment. It's where we get the word crucifixion, cruciatu, torture. Even between the flatteries, which is the accusative object of inter, or among the flatteries of my nurses, and the jokes of those laughing, and among the happinesses of those playing around, of those joking around. And so therefore, as a little baby, obviously you are in the atmosphere of flattery, of having a fun time, of having a good time, and that makes it easier to learn. When you have that atmosphere, when you have that culture of lightheartedness, it's easier to learn. One would want to learn, and that's something that we as teachers struggle to try and get in our classes so that you would want to have a fun time learning these difficult things, because they are difficult. So we continue on. He says, Didache, vero. Truly, I learned, again, disco, discere, didache, those implied words without the punishing burden of those forcing. And so in other words, when you're a little kid, it's not as though your mother's standing over you with these flashcards saying, learn this new word, learn this new word, learn this new word, but rather it is a greater atmosphere and easier to do. From here, henceforth, elucet. Elucet is here going to be like, it is clear, another impersonal verb. And that impersonal verb is going to, again, take as its real subject an expression of action. And so, it is clear enough that a liberal curiosity has a greater power, and maiorum, remember, is the comparative of magnus, for the purpose of those things about to be learned. Here, it is a form that cannot be a gerund, and therefore is a gerundive, modifying ista, which is the object, accusative plural neuter, of the odd. And I love the fact that he chooses ista. It's the same as illa, from ille, illa, illud, but it has kind of like a sharp edge to it. And I always like to tell my students, translate it as that, but that freaking, or that darned. And so here, henceforth, it is clear enough that a liberal, a free curiosity has a greater power for the purpose of those freaking things, because they're freaking hard and they're freaking frustrating, about to be learned, than, and of course I know to translate the quam as than, because we have the comparative, a demanding necessity than a meticulous necessity. But I think they suggest demanding, or timidus is what they suggest down in here. And so timidus, a fearful necessity, as it were. And again, with the elucet last thing, that is translated, it is clear enough. This whole action, the act of a liberal curiosity having, or a free curiosity having a greater power, that is the thing that is clear for the purpose of those freaking things, because they're hard and frustrating and you don't know them, about to be learned, than a meticulous or a fearful or a demanding necessity. So, there it is, a wonderful sentiment that I think rings true and that very much I think students today can obviously relate in the exact same way.